of the day. This, of course, is the CEO murder suspect, Luigi Mangione. And I did want to get the very latest on this as he remains jailed without bail in Pennsylvania. He was arrested Monday after being spotted at a McDonald's in the city of Altoona, which is about 230 miles west of New York City. His lawyer in Pennsylvania, Thomas Dickey, said Mangione intends to plead not guilty. What's happening right now is that he is fighting attempts to extradite him back to New York so that he can face a murder charge in CEO Brian Thompson's killing. A hearing has been scheduled for December 30th. Now, this comes as a gun found on Mangione in the killing of Thompson matches shell casings found at the crime scene. New York Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch also said that lab results matched the suspect's fingerprints to a water bottle and protein bar wrapper found near the scene of the killing. Little new information has come out about a possible motive, although officials did find writings in Mangione's possession that hinted at a hatred of corporate greed. And as I mentioned, he does remain jailed in Pennsylvania. A little bit about background of Mangione. He is an Ivy League graduate from a prominent Maryland real estate family, and in social media posts previously, he wrote about experiencing severe chronic back pain before undergoing a spinal fusion surgery. After that, he posted that the operation had been a success and that his pain had improved and his mobility returned. He also urged others to consider the same type of surgery. To talk more on all of these developments, I do want to invite in attorney Jeremy Rosenthal. Jeremy, it's great to see you.
Good morning, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I wanted to start with the extradition process. Right now, Mangione is in jail in Pennsylvania. They're trying to get him back to New York City, where he faces murder charges. There is a hearing scheduled for December 30th, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on what we might expect to come out of that hearing.
Extradition between one state and another state is 100% about just getting the paperwork straightened out, correct. So it buys the defense a little bit of time, but he will be extradited, if not on the 30th, shortly thereafter. The state of Pennsylvania is requesting from New York State what is called a governor's warrant. When we talk about one state to another state, again, it's really just paperwork. When we talk about one country to another country, in those instances, you have international treaties and things like that. But again, the defense is contesting it because why not? It doesn't cost anything and it gets them a little bit of time. New York State is going to be pinning their ears back and going after Mr. Mangione, whether he contests extradition or not. So there's not a lot of downside in fighting it.
So legally, what can we expect to happen between now and then? I have to imagine that both sides are working around the clock.
I think you're exactly right. And there's, I think, a couple new developments, which I think are just over the last few days or so, some just coming in this morning. One is that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, is actually taking the case already to a grand jury. So when somebody gets arrested, that's not necessarily a formal charge. It's the citizens of New York, if you will, that will ultimately indict Mr. Mangione, and that is done through the grand jury process. Alvin Bragg's already doing that. He's presenting evidence already. So this is lightning fast. So you would think that Mr. Mangione is going to be indicted probably for this offense any day. The evidence against him is certainly mounting. There's a lot of different states, a lot of different agencies that are really sort of walling him in on that front. The second big issue is that I don't know if it's Mr. Dickey that has reached out to a colleague or if Mr. Mangione is completely switching gears, but he's hired an attorney by the name of Friedman Agnifilo, who is sort of prominent, high profile in Manhattan. She's a former DA there. On CNN, before she was affiliated with the case earlier this week, she was just a legal commentator. What she said was she thought that this could be what she characterized as a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. So that may kind of give you an early insight into what Mr. Mangione is thinking here and how his legal team is sort of transitioning in their defense as well. So you're absolutely right. There are a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, and I wanted to play this out because you were talking about how there might be that argument of reason by insanity. This is some video taken earlier when he was taken into custody, and he's very angry and yelling in this outburst, and this does seem, Jeremy, to be part of that, perhaps that strategy where you have these situations where you can see him acting out very distressed. And I have to imagine that that would be part of their argument.
Look, if I'm defending this case, there are three ways in my mind to defend this case. The first case is that he didn't do it. That is appearing harder and harder by the day and by the moment because all this circumstantial evidence is just simply walling him in. The second is that, look, maybe he did do it, but you can't prove that he did it. In that instance, you would fight all of the search warrants. There have been, I think, 3 search warrants already in the case, and you're going to fight every little thing like that. You're going to fight the search warrant. You're going to fight the forensics. You're going to fight the analysis. You're going to fight the fingerprint evidence. You can do that too. I don't think he's got a particularly good defense in any regards, but the highest percentage one would be what we call not guilty by reason of insanity. In New York State, the Mr. Mangione's team has the burden to prove that he didn't appreciate what he was doing was wrong, and that he didn't understand the nature of his actions. And it almost certainly includes an evaluation by his own expert. It almost certainly includes having some type of forensic psychologist visit him and visit him very soon. We're talking this week if they haven't already done it. And I want to stay in my lane here because I'm not a forensic psychologist. I'm a lawyer. But schizophrenia is something that happens to young men in their teenage years and early 20s. This man, you have family members who say, we just don't understand who he is anymore. The family says he fell off the map 6 months ago. Are these things consistent with a schizophrenic break? And would a schizophrenic break from reality explain some of these things? It could make this case a lot closer than it appears.
And you were talking about that. We have been hearing from so many of his friends, his acquaintances, his former classmates saying that the person that they knew is very different from the person that they see and the allegations now levied against him. And I have to imagine that actually would help with the defense, saying he was never violent. He was always helpful. He's young. He's coming from a prominent family. He fell off the face of the earth. In fact, his mother issued a missing persons search for him in San Francisco. I'm curious, though, Jeremy, because we've seen the defense mount these cases by reason of an insanity. And I have to imagine there's a very high bar. So when we're looking at this, what must the defense have to prove? Because it's on them to prove this.
Right. So there's 2 different things to sort of keep in mind. One is, what do you have to prove? And the second issue is what we call the burden. So the burden that he has to prove it by is by a preponderance. So 50% plus 1. But unlike most traditional criminal trials, the defense bears the burden here to prove this case. But you do have to admit the conduct. In other words, he would be coming to court, and Mr. Mangione would have to, in essence, concede, look, yes, I am responsible for the death of Brian Thompson. This is me doing this weapon, shooting the weapon. This is me doing all of these things. So that's the first part of it. But then he has to persuade the jury by a preponderance that he did not know what he was doing was wrong. And even though it's only by a preponderance, even though he only has to prove it 50%, showing a jury that, look, I just did not appreciate that pulling out a gun and shooting another human being was wrong. That is a very difficult thing to do. And again, you're going to have to get some expert testimony, some forensic psychologists to take up the stand and to basically say in clinical terms, this is why this happened. And again, Alvin Bragg and his team, they're going to do everything they can do to shut that down. They're going to try to have their own forensic psychologists. In most instances, they'll have the instance to actually interview him if they do try to mount an insanity defense, and they're going to do everything they can do to shut that down. But again, if I'm defending the case and I'm looking at my options, we didn't do it's not looking like a really good option. Trying to say that all of these law enforcement agencies didn't properly collect this evidence. That's also not very good defense here either. And not guilty by reason of insanity doesn't look like a great defense. But of those three, that's kind of where my money is at the moment.
Well, it is going to be interesting. Obviously, the jury has to take a look at the evidence and the facts, but one also has to wonder, he's young, he's from a prominent family, could emotions also influence the possible outcome? Legally, we do have the hearing on December 30th. What are you keeping a very close eye on between now and then in terms of procedures, in terms of information and developments that might come out?
I'm looking to see if his defense team is really going to go down the route of not guilty by reason of insanity. Again, his new defense lawyer hinted when she was interviewed on CNN that she thought that his best defense was going to be not guilty by reason of insanity. But that's when she was a talking head on television, just on the camera because of their good looks, right? That's I'm sure why you talk to me. But she didn't have any insight in the case at that point. Now that she does, now that she's getting her footing, now that she's sort of moving forward on these things, where is she going with this case? What is she going to say publicly? Is she going to come out and start talking about this break from reality? Is she going to talk about how his friends, family don't recognize him? Is she going to start talking about, look, this is what schizophrenia is, and this is how it manifests? And again, when a good effective defense in criminal law is something that the prosecution has a very hard time shutting down. We didn't do it is not a really good defense here because the prosecution can shut that down 8 ways till Sunday. So is it a big deal that you're going to court and confessing to it for the not guilty by reason of insanity? I don't necessarily think so. That's what I'm looking for in the next few weeks, is to see, is that really going to be the motion of the ocean in this case? Are we looking at a not guilty by reason of insanity plea and trial? Because if we are, this thing could get really interesting.
Yeah, so Jeremy, I want your thoughts on that because we are anticipating, the strategy to be shared at some point. When it comes to I would say, a bold move, right? Not guilty by reason of insanity. Do you expect the attorneys to hold that close to their vest, or do you think that they would, share this with the entire world to lay the groundwork?
Mr. Dickey has been very public so far, the attorney, in what he thinks. I don't know if that will continue or if he's working in this case in conjunction with Miss Friedman Agnifilo. I don't know that. Legally, you can keep this to your vest for a while as long as you want to develop it. But at some point, the law will require that you to disclose this to the prosecution. Most defenses you don't have to disclose, or a lot of defenses you don't have to disclose to the other side. Not guilty by reason of insanity is not one of those because the prosecution is entitled to have experts of their own who are going to go and sort of canvass the situation. So you can keep it to your vest for a while. And look, if I'm defending a case, if they're defending a case, you are going down every single road that you possibly can. Even though, like I've been talking about a few times here, even though we're talking about all of this circumstantial evidence sort of walling off, if you will, any type of we didn't do it or alibi defense, you still got to go down those roads. You still have to investigate those very thoroughly. You still have to investigate the search warrants. You still have to go and try to shoot down as much of the evidence as you can. So you're really looking at all of the above as far as defenses go. And yes, you do want to keep it to your vest until you really have to commit at which direction you're going to go. But if they're going to go not guilty reason of insanity, at some point, they will have to tell the world that that's what they're going to do. And Alvin Bragg and his team will have the ability to combat that.
Jeremy, it's interesting from your legal perspective, as you're taking a look at these developments, as you're seeing this case unfold, does anything particularly stand out to you? Is this an unusual case in the legal sense, or has it been pretty standard in terms of how the procedure has happened?
So far, it's been pretty standard procedure-wise. It's been pretty standard on how a high-profile case would go. What's really sort of interesting here is the narrative and the dialogue. New York police are concerned about copycat crimes. They are concerned that Mr. Mangione is turning into a folk hero. They're worried that there's been posters with other CEOs, with other insurance executives that are out there. They're worried for these people's safety. That part's very unique. And it is, whether we like it or not, nobody likes murder, and nobody thinks that it's appropriate to kill somebody to try to bring attention to your cause. But the facts are that we're talking about healthcare, which is a very emotional, very complicated issue. So it is stirring a lot of that dialogue. That part is very unconventional and very different. We also want to make sure that we don't taint the jury pool. But that said, in Manhattan, you got a lot of potential jurors. I think it's pretty rare to move a trial out of Manhattan just because of publicity, simply because you can cycle through so many people. But there are a lot of high emotions here. And again, this thing is very unique in the dialogue that I think it's driving across the country.
It is absolutely going to be very interesting to see how this all unfolds. And no doubt, Jeremy, we're going to be talking with you a lot as this case develops. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Stephanie. Have a great morning.
You too. And of course, any new developments in this case, we will bring